Lucy Wood. Oh, how refreshing to talk to Lucy. She's got an incredible story. You know, she was from London. She kind of, I don't know how, she played the victim route as a child and had some eating disorders and some trauma there. And then she eventually, in London came into the business scene where she was doing high powered sales jobs and doing extremely well. And then she just had enough. And she started doing podcasting. She wasn't partying as much with her friends and just upped and moved to Sydney, Australia. Absolutely incredible. And now she teaches sales organizations. She coaches them on how to, perform better. We talk about. I open up with slut shaming. I ask about it. I say, how damaging is it? You know, and she's very much into woman leadership and where it needs to go and empowerment, and it's a great conversation. We also talk about the great orgasm gap, which is fascinating. The statistics that she cites there and what's happening there, and then bring it all the way back around to leadership and coaching. Just a great conversation from a fascinating woman, Lucy Wood. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Lucy Wood, thank you so much for your time today. So, how damaging is slut shaming? Start
Ooh, what
there.
a question. I love this. How damaging. Wow. Well, I think firstly, slut shaming can be damaging for men as women. I think things have shifted a
Mm,
lot. I think, yeah, men, it used to be the cool thing, like, I don't know how far I can go with my language on here, but like,
as far as you like.
how where a guy can get with their dick, right? Where they can put their dick anywhere versus a
Yeah.
woman. And I think now things have shifted a lot where it's seen as empowering for a woman to openly speak about her sexual partnerships and her relationships. And that's seen as like more of a reward in some ways or more of like a
Hmm.
respect. And then I think it's then the slut shaming is more towards the male side of things is what I'm seeing. So I think it's really shifting now in dynamics. So I think slut shaming, I mean, it's each to their own. But personally, if I got called a slut, I would think it's just their stuff. It's not my issue. So I love that question to start off with.
Let's define it. Let's define it. So you're being shamed. You're being the woman is being looked at as being promiscuous. They're being a slut, and men are making fun of that. Let's define slut shaming.
Okay. The podcaster me wants to ask you the same question. Um, that's define slut shaming. I think if, say, you are in a position where someone is they're thinking that you're dating multiple men or you're sleeping with multiple men or you are sexually promiscuous. So you're
Mm.
going out there and maybe embodying your sexuality into your business, which I am a big advocate for because I think it's such a powerful tool, right? Male, female, it's this creative energy that we all have. And often people can be intimidated by it, right? And then I think that's where the slut shaming often comes from, where someone is like, intimidated by someone's sexuality. They haven't looked at their own sexuality and therefore will then accuse someone of being promiscuous, but actually maybe it's their own sexual desires that they aren't feeding or fulfilling themselves.
This just sounds like name calling to me, Lucy. We need to move on, right? I mean, is it serious? Is it? I hear it a lot. I hear it a lot, and I hope I don't do it. I don't mean to, but there's kind of a double standard, is what you're saying.
I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, if someone called me a slut, I'd be the same as you. I'd move on. I'd be like, it's your shit. It's not mine. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I happen to think that what people think of me is none of my business. But if I were to, be called a name like that, I guess I'd have to need more context and what was happening, who's around. It's it's a tough thing, but the inequality. I mean, one of the principles upon which you stand are trying to elevate women and to get them back into leadership. And you say you lived in a man's world for too long.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know if you've watched the film Wolf of Wall Street.
Ah, of
Yeah.
course.
So, I've been in sales for like 10 years, and when I lived in London, as you can probably tell, I have a British accent.
No.
Although I'm currently in Australia. I was in a very hardcore pressured sales environment in London, where your numbers were on the screen, you were all competing against each other, and I actually felt as a woman that I had that superpower in a sales environment that I could read people easier. I could get away with asking different
Mm.
questions because typically as a woman, sometimes you can ask the more challenging questions because you're seen as sometimes more of a softer approach. And this is not generalizing, it's just in my own experience. And I found that I've done very well in my sales. And I think more women that can learn to embody that and empower that within themselves, we can get away with a lot.
But you didn't like it and you left. You packed up London and went to Australia. This is pre-COVID, and I
Yeah.
mean, it takes a lot of guts, takes a lot of chutzpah. Why'd you do it?
Great question. I'm still ask myself that some days, to be honest. Why did I do it? Because I think the London lifestyle is not a healthy place, to be honest.
Mm.
I don't know if you ever been to London. But it's grey, it's dark, it's rainy. People are often very depressed with their lives. And there's a real sense of conditioning over there where you have to have the mortgage, the two kids, the family by the age of 30. And a lot of people are just unhappy, and I know for me, I tend not to follow what everyone else does. And so I moved to Australia. Yeah, not ideal. January 2020, learned a lot of lessons, dear God. And built a new lifestyle over here. And I think in Australia, people are a lot more focused on wellness. There's still a very huge business
Mm.
element in Sydney, particularly in TV and podcasting. But for me, naturally, it was having a lifestyle that I could live a very nice lifestyle by the ocean, but I could still continue to build my business and be the person that I wanted to be. So I think environment is incredibly important for anyone.
Did you know anybody in Sydney?
Two people at the time.
I say, wow. Wow, that's absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Next thing. Yeah, absolutely admirable and incredible. The orgasm gap. You
Ooh.
cite some incredible statistics,
Mm.
Lucy. 75% of women don't always achieve orgasm compared to 20% of men. 56% of men think women don't need an orgasm to enjoy sex. It's ridiculous. What's happening here?
What is happening, women? I think a lot of us, which is a big thing around my podcast, Working Under Pleasure, is so important to me, is that there's a
Mm,
connection between your throat and your creative space. So, what you might call is your yoni, your vagina, your pussy, whatever part of that feminine space that you have of your own, there's that disconnect. So a lot of women tend to perform, we tend to fake the orgasm just to please the guy. There's a lot of shaming around communicating about what you like and what you don't like as a woman to a man. So no, a man's not going to know if a man's not going to be directed, right, into what to do. So often, a man can think that he's done a great job when he hasn't, but the woman hasn't communicated. So I really think
mm,
our responsibility as women to first understand our own bodies. And that can be scary in itself, right? Because we're often shamed around those parts of us and put on birth control and contraception from early days where we aren't linked to our intuition and those powerful parts that women have, and therefore we don't know. You could get to the age of 30, 40 and have no idea how you like to orgasm, and your partner will just think you're having a great time, but you're not. So I think that's why there's that big orgasm gap. I do
mm.
see it changing and shifting, and women being a lot more comfortable when we have things like vibrators and open sexuality conversations. Obviously, we're interviewing today during Valentine's Day. So there's a lot more kind of themes around love and sex in this month. But why do we just have it in February? Why is it not more liberal and open throughout the rest of the year? So, women, we need to take some responsibility for that orgasm gap for sure.
I'm certainly open to have it more throughout the year. But and then you have some men, some kind of shallow men who don't like to be instructed or I was going to say criticize, but it's not criticize. And sometimes I hear some of my buddies say, she's telling me this stuff, and I'm like, I should know that, and I feel ashamed. And I mean, it's got to be communication on both parts.
100%. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, if a guy has never heard this communication and they're not, 18, 19, right? Where these communications
Mm.
should have been talked to when people lost their virginity. I mean, probably you weren't 18 or 19, but younger. But now that we're in this older phase, people think that they should be experienced and they should know what they're doing. But if someone's not communicated it from an early stage, then there should be no shame. But if what you don't know is what you don't know, right? So it's a challenging conversation to have. But if you want to orgasm, you've got to have it. At the end of the day, no matter what age you are.
Most certainly. And it seems to me that communication is the essential kind of pillar to so many issues in a relationship, but it's just kind of that taboo where one partner may not want to openly discuss with the other, and there's like kind of that shame, and there's I don't know, maybe there's slut shaming in there as well. I'm not quite sure. I've always liked to openly talk about things. Uh, some partners may not, but I guess how do we get over that hump?
Yeah. I think it is a challenging one, and it's specifics depending on the person, right? It's not one
Mm,
size fits all, literally. I think it starts with like gentle conversation openers, because like you said, the man may have a lot of guilt or shame, but equally the woman might as well. Say you've been with your partner for 10 years and you've never had this conversation. Like, that's going to be a big step to take. And I think it's almost like starting from scratch and maybe floating different things about, like, hey, do you want to try something new? Like, kind of word it as in, let's mix things up rather than blaming someone, or, being like, hey, I've never really enjoyed our time together intimately. Like, it's saying, like, let's change things and let's try things new, because it's a very vulnerable position for everyone involved, right? So I think you got to be sensitive to each other's feelings. Whether there's an ego involved, there will always be an ego involved. But yeah, I think that's a good way to approach these things.
and we both spoke to Susan Bratton,
Yeah.
and yeah, she's great, and she has a very deliberate way. She's written 40, 50 books, something like that, and just openly discuss these issues. Don't make it as equal pacing as your finances or as your as anything else, because it's just as important.
100%. And the sex and love the money and sex thing goes hand in hand, right?
Mm.
And both probably had the same conversation with Susan on our own shows, but it's like if you see a scarcity in your money, you see a scarcity in your sex life. If you see you need to control one side, you see you need to control the other. And even like the Think and Grow Rich book that was written so many years ago, chapter 11, if anyone wants to have a look, it talks about sex and it talks about how money's involved. And it's like, it makes so much sense. And if you look at your sex life, you will see patterns in every other area of your life. And Susan's an amazing advocate for it. So I think it's a great place to start if you really want to reflect on how to change your life. What is happening with your sex life, or what is not happening with your sex life?
Oh, certainly. And I see, I know it happened to me when, in my 20s, and I have lots of friends who, went through this. They have a relationship, they get married, and, at one particular point, I don't it doesn't matter who started first, but the affection wasn't there, so the woman starts backing away, and then the sex isn't there, so the man starts backing away, and then it's just slowly start to divide, and there's less affection, and there's less sex, and you're just slowly kinda moving apart, and you're not talking about it. Then maybe kids come up, and these kinds of things happen, and it's just slowly driving away, and it's so sad. It's a tragedy often because you just end up being completely separated from each other when you just needed to have a little more communication. I don't like having sex with you because you're not affectionate. Well, I don't like being affectionate with you because we're not having sex. So it's just communication, Lucy.
100%. And I also think, and you probably hear about love languages and maybe roll your
Mm,
eyes, because a lot of people talk about
not
them.
at
But
all.
no, okay. Well, some people, you just mentioned affection, so physical touch, right? Some people's love languages are totally different. And communication, like you said, is the commonality that has to be had. So it might be words of affirmation, it might be quality time, it could be, yeah, physical touch. What's the other one? Acts of service.
Gifts? Yeah.
And yes, there you
Excellent.
go. All 5 done. So,
Mm.
there is that understanding that, hey, obviously sex is so important with a connection between anyone, whether you have kids or, businesses and whatever. But there's also other ways to show love to each other as well. And it's important to understand how they like to give and how you like to receive as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then just the way of communicating. I have a tendency just to ask a lot of questions. It's the way I learn, Lucy. And I've had partners in the past who found it interrogative. So you're interrogating me. Well, I don't know how else to learn. I'm just asking a lot of questions. So I had to kind of soften and space it out. But my point is, we all have a different way of learning, and we have to adapt that to our partner. And again, just knowing each other. And when you're younger, these things don't really develop, and then as you get older, they do, and hopefully you just grow together.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that you ask so many questions. I think that's a great attribute to have. I feel like that too myself. When I'm with someone, I often interrogate them, and maybe it's the podcasters within us too, right?
Yes.
But sometimes I do say to people like, "Hey, I ask a lot of questions. I'm really curious about you as a person." And everyone likes to talk about themselves. So I think if someone questions you around that, then it's almost like, well, how do you like to answer questions? It's even communicating how you want to communicate,
Mm.
right? um but I think that's super powerful that you ask a lot of questions, and you work out very quickly if that is someone that you want to continue to get to know, or if you don't. So yeah.
Yeah, very true. And can we talk a little bit about how you said that you, as a child, you kind of went the victim route and you
Mhm.
suppressed your voice.
Oh,
Was this a communication issue?
oh wow, good question. So as you can tell, I'm very outspoken, and the
Yeah.
English kind of way of culture is often very much like to be seen and not heard as a child.
Mm,
I could talk before I could walk, which is a bit
I saw
unusual.
that.
And I'm 5'1", so I'm quite a small. I was quite small as well as a child, so I was very much said it how it was. And it was no disrespect to my family. It was literally just how people are brought up in England, to be seen and not heard, and to be like, a pretty little girl in a dress just kind of smiling. So at a very young age I learned that I couldn't really talk up and express my truth. And I was quite an intelligent child. I was very aware of my intelligence, but I was also aware of when I opened my mouth, I triggered a lot of people. Um, and you don't want to upset your parents, right? I mean, sometimes you probably do. But so I got into a pattern of disordered eating from the age of 8 to 30. I'm now 32. And actually, until I left England, I really focused on that area of myself because I was like, I've put myself in a victim mentality, which I think is actually can be an addiction itself, like poor me, boo hoo, and think of me. When as an adult, you have full responsibility of your actions. You
You sure
can
do.
change things, Obviously, you can't shift things immediately overnight in some circumstances, but you can have a plan and you can be disciplined towards that. So, I was like, this stops, I've had podcasting shows for 4 years. So I actually started talking up a lot more. Just, I think the moment, Joey, I decided to move to Australia, I was like, right, stuff it. I'm just going to be myself.
Wow.
Created different podcast shows, interviewed people, and was very vocal with my voice. But don't get me wrong, like, there's slut shaming, but there's also like tall poppy syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of that, where
No.
if someone sees you stepping out of their comfort zone or your comfort zone, people get intimidated, right? Like, this person is now behaving a certain way that I'm not comfortable with because they're being themselves. And if someone else isn't fulfilling their own dreams and their own passions, people can tend to bring you down, right? So they'll see you growing as like this amazing flower, which is where the tall poppy name comes from, and they'll try to
Uh,
bring you down. So I was in this like Wolf of Wall Street sales organization, and a lot of my friends all wanted to go out and get drunk every night. And I was a big partier. I would go out 7 nights a week. And I stopped
wow.
that because I was like, and in England that's pretty normal, no one has a drinking problem, of course.
Mm-mm.
And so I stopped that and I started creating my own podcast show, and I would record in my apartment and there'd be a tube going past, so like the railway in England, and I'd be editing my sound in the background of how to get rid of tubes. And I was just full on myself and I lost so many friends, so many friends. And I think
Wow.
that is why a lot of people though are afraid to use their voices, because it's the sheep mentality, right? You follow what everyone else does, but are you really happy? Some people are, and that's amazing. But if you're not, you will find the right people if you actually share your truth.
How did you lose those people?
A lot of them, I mean, I'm very vocal with them now, but a lot of them, I didn't go out drinking every night. I wanted to be doing a
Ah,
podcast show, right? So a lot of them were like, why are you not coming out and getting drunk on a bottle of Prosecco with us tonight? And I'd be like, A, I don't want to, and B, I found this thing called podcasting, and 4 years ago, podcasting wasn't really a thing, and I was
right.
like, "Oh, I've got it," and so that's why I lost a lot of them, but I also knew I was moving to Australia, and it was a big step, and when you're 20, I was 29 at the time, and a lot of people were like, um why are you moving away from a stable job, a potential house in London that you could have bought, to just move to Australia when there were the big thing in Australia at the time was bushfires. I mean, bushfires feel like
Oh,
nothing
yeah.
compared to what we've had for the last 2.5 years. And
Hmm.
they still are obviously detrimental to Australia, but it's a very different kind of thing. And I had to stand strong in that and be like, I don't know what it is, but my gut and my heart wants to move over here, and I'm not going to follow what you want to do, because if you've been unhappy for that much time of your life, you gotta take responsibility for it. And that's what I
And it's incredible. And
did.
I couldn't find any of those podcasts. Was it more like a vocal journal? Were you interviewing people?
I deleted a lot of them. So the Lucy Wood show
Ah,
is still on there, but Freedom State of Mind and Full as Fuck, I don't know if I can swear, I
of course.
deleted because I got all my imposter syndrome. I started having haters message me, and this is early days of my podcasting. I had haters message me, be like, "You think you're all that? We don't know you anymore." Like friends at the time. So I deleted my first two shows. And still to this day, I really regret that, because I think, and I still have some episodes saved on my Mac, but they were the best interviews because they were so authentic. My windows were rattling because an aeroplane was flying over, and I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing. But I was very sensitive because people were like, who do you think you are? So I deleted the first two shows. At the moment, you'll only be able to see the Lucy Wood show. I'm working under pleasure on Spotify and Apple. Yeah,
So you let the haters win, Lucy.
I did.
So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
and they were saying they were were you openly criticizing them in the podcast? I mean, what was the criticism?
Um, I was just sharing my own experiences. So, for example, I would share things like, but I'd be triggering them, right? So I'd say things like,
Uh,
I'm moving away from London because I want to surround myself by people that are building the dreams that I want to build. I'd say things like that, right? And they would then that would be obviously something that they were insecure about. But at the time, I wouldn't want to lose any friends, no matter what. So I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And then I got to the point where I was like, stuff it. I'm not calling any names. I'm not shaming anyone. I'm explaining my own situation. And of course, I probably have, upon reflection, maybe said something. I've offended them, right? I take responsibility for that. However, it's their stuff, it's not mine. But it took me a
yeah.
long time to realize that. Like I said, 2 years worth of podcastings I deleted.
Oh
Yeah,
my god.
I can feel it
I'm
on my
very
jaw.
careful. I tend to not. I almost treat a compliment like a, like a reprimand. I don't want to hear it because I know people are nice and they want to compliment, and others may have something, negative to say. But it seems to be the same to me. If I get too many compliments, I might start. I might start mailing stuff in. I might not start working as hard. If I hear a lot of
Mhm.
complaints, then I'll say, "Well, I'm not doing stuff. I'm going to start changing the way I do when I like the way I'm doing it." So I just kind of look at those things very differently. I tend to kind of post and ghost, so I don't see any of the responses. I don't look.
Post
My
and
opinion, my way.
Post and Ghost, I love that. I'm gonna borrow that from you. So,
Oh,
like,
I got that from somebody else.
it's fine. You post, you don't read any comments, you don't, or what if
No.
someone messages you privately? Like, I was getting WhatsApps and text messages from friends.
Ah.
Yeah, it wasn't, randoms, it was, like, people that I'd known
Ah.
and I'd worked with. Even on my one of my leaving dues, I had someone read out and quote something in my podcast in front of everyone in the office. And be like, who does she think she is? She's now got this podcast show and she's flying to Australia. And I was I felt shameful of it at the time. I was really embarrassed. But now I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you for bringing that up
Yeah,
again.
you gotta get to the point where you gotta take those negative things out of your life, and that's exactly what you did, but it's amazing to me that you just, you were at a very big company and, I saw on your LinkedIn and you were killing it and living in this man's world, but then you didn't want to live that party life and you kind of brought it all in and you got retrospective and then you just moved 10,000 miles away. It's absolutely remarkable. And then you said when you got there, you got scared a little bit and then you started working for another big company and you hated yourself for it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, but because obviously none of us knew what was going to happen, right, in 2020.
Right.
And I had this big dream, I was going to move over in January and I was going to set up my own business and my own life and be in Bondi by the ocean. And then obviously everything shuts. A border's shut. You can't leave Australia. Or I had the choice of you either go back to the UK and you can't go back to Australia or you stay in Australia. And I
Huh.
remember mom at the time being like, well, we're just assuming you're coming back. And I was like, that has not crossed my mind. That has not
Wow.
crossed my mind. I'm
Good for
staying
you.
here. Thank you. And and do you know what? Upon reflection, I think all the haters from my podcasting really helped me build my resilience for actually
Huh.
being like, you know what, this doesn't happen. I mean, even my old job back in London would have taken me. I mean, they still would take me back now, but they would have taken me back in to help me, which would have been amazing. But it was like an absolute no. But I knew I had knew 2 people over here. I had no contacts, but I had a lot of sales experience. So I thought, what, to make financial gains, I have to get back into the corporate world. And what I say to anyone out there that wants to quit the corporate world is learning from my own experience. The corporate world is actually a very amazing place if you utilize it to your own advantage,
Mm,
right? Like you can make consistent money if you're building a business. You can now work remote, so you can be doing your podcasting on the side on your lunch breaks or whatever, but you can utilize your laptops, your equipment from work. You have that stability, and I don't think people talk about it enough on an entrepreneurial journey, that it's okay to go back into corporate if things
mm,
have panned out, because it's this, right? As an entrepreneur, it's not, I made 10K this month, my first month, and like, nah, that's not reality. Great if you were that 1% that did that, but the 99% have to have some backing financially, or a wealthy partner, or savings, or property. Like, we don't talk about it enough. And I
mm.
learned that the hard way, because I listened to the people that would say that. And now I'm a big advocate for talking about it and being like, yep, didn't have the right finances. Lockdown happened. So I went back into corporate, because it's important to express that, and it's not a failure. I thought I would. I still think I fail sometimes, but you have to take responsibility for yourself as the CEO of your business, and if that means working for someone else at different stages of your business, then it's your responsibility. Yeah.
Failures are fine, Lucy. You fail quick and move on. You have this heartfelt video where it's a few minutes and it's just you saying, what the fuck? You don't quit your job, people. Don't quit your job. I know you have a dream, but don't quit your job. Keep working there, gather some capital, and then people tell me quit your job and go for it. Go for it. That's just you've got to be sensible. Make a plan. Make sure you have money. When I started my business in the '90s, and I'm in the tech field, I remember people asking me or telling me, "Oh, it must be so great. You don't have a boss." I said, I got more bosses now than I've ever had. Every one of my clients is my boss. And the
Mm.
more I have, the better. My employees, I have to listen to them, the vendors, the banks, the partners. Please don't start a business thinking you're not going to have any bosses. And I always try to, whenever everybody's starting a business, I say, how long can you go without a salary? Answer that question. How long can you go without a salary? It better be at least a year. It better be at least a year. And no, I got this idea, and Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, and these kinds of names come up, and but that heartfelt video, Lucy, where you're just like lying down, you're writhing yourself, and you're like, this is it, and the people listen to me, and you could tell it was the first take. It was just right out of you, and it was wonderful. Listen to it, whoever's listening now, or watch it.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it's on my YouTube. It was literally like a month ago when I was like, stuff this. I had a few clients that I'd brought aboard that just weren't in alignment. And I was like, I'm not doing them a service. I'm not doing myself a service,
Mm.
business a service. I was like, I'm going to get back into corporate. And I messaged my old boss the other day. And like, I will take a job if it means I'm building a business that's aligned with me, and I'm joining things like this with you, where you can talk about it and people will listen and learn from it, rather than get into horrific financial situations. Like, I'm like you, I'm very lucky. I've saved, I've set myself up financially that it's okay, but mentally it's not fun sometimes, if there's no money coming in, and god, it's challenging. Yeah.
Very, very challenging.
Yeah.
So the world needs more female leaders, needs more founders, more female founders. What do we need to do to make this happen?
I love this question. You know what? I heard a stat the other day that only 13% of podcasters in the world are female.
Huh.
Um, and that's actually a
Wow.
high stat for women that are leading, right? I think in Australia at the moment, it's 5% successful women entrepreneurs, and that's actually a high stat as well for the world. I think London's a little bit more; it's like 8%. But to answer your question, um, I think we need to support each other more, and I don't
Mm.
think it's just women. I think it's men, unicorns, whatever gender you term yourself of, or whatever non-gender you term yourself as. It's support. Like if someone is changing their lifestyle because they want to build something, it doesn't have to save the world. It can be something tiny, but they just feel fulfilled by it. Support them. Doesn't
Mm.
matter what you think, support them. Because if it brings them out of some form of like depression, addiction, or, all these things that so many people suffer with right now more than ever, if it's bringing them joy, if it's bringing them connection, then just support them, because we need more communities together. We really need more communities. And I feel podcasting has come at this beautiful time because it's connecting people from all over the world. Someone in the poorest places in the world can listen and access this kind of knowledge through a podcast
Mm.
if they have a smartphone. And most people have a smartphone rather than a toothbrush, which is a crazy statistic in the world as
Yeah.
well. I don't mean smelly breath, not good dental health, but they have a smartphone. And so we can empower people to make a change. And I think if you surround yourself with the right books, the right podcasts, the right mindset, and you just put yourself out there, then that's how we need more entrepreneurs. And I think good money and good people, it will just transform the world, because we've got this mentality of like, just get by, or just, rich people are selfish, or, all this money stuff. And it's like, if people that wanted a better world for themselves are given financial freedom, wow, the world will be an amazing place. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my answer.
And now you help coach them. You help coach women now.
I help coach men and women. Weirdly enough, I actually seem to have quite a lot more men than I have had women
Hmm.
come in. Yeah, and it's been a combination of, it's kind of shifted a lot at the moment. It's actually more now in the tantra space. So I have had this big annoying part of me where a lot of people will look at tantra and think that's really woo woo, that's too out there, that's very spiritual. But as humans, we are so disconnected from our bodies. And if you're in the wrong job, you're in the wrong partnership, you're in the wrong lifestyle, your body will be shouting to you in some way, and you won't be listening to it. And typically in the US and Australia, we pick up a painkiller, we do
Yeah.
whatever we need to do to get by. When actually, listen to that, because it's something's not right and you've got to take a step for it, because your health is your wealth. So at the moment, I'm really teaching people how to be in their body. And everyone thinks tantra, woohoo, sex, yeah. And of course there's a big sexual element in that, but unless you've worked on your body and how your body feels, and I know we're all fed up of hearing the T word, trauma, but any particular things that may have, disrupted you in your life or in past lives, if you believe in that, we got to get that out first. And then you can experience pleasure. And it doesn't need to be sexual pleasure, it can be in your relationships and your day to day and transforming your life. So that's where I really focus on embodiment practices. I think we love to sit down, but movement is medicine. You have to be listening to your body, because there's this huge disconnect between mind and body. And there's that brain and mind gut link. Most people aren't listening to it, including myself. So, yeah, that's what I teach at the moment.
I'm really sick of the whole, we shouldn't talk about sex, but it's a major part of our life. It's a major part of our life. And it's just the way people kind of put it aside. And now, let's talk about Tantra. Tell me what it is.
Woo.
Define it.
Define it. Wow. Okay, so it's a very ancient practice around how to cultivate sexual energy with yourself, with a partner, and how to create emotional connection with your own body and with other people. So
Hmm.
typically, there's no actual penetration. It can be done for hours and days. You hear famous people that have just spent days cultivating this energy as entrepreneurs to create business ideas with partners and with themselves. Um, And if you think about it, right, of course, we've all come from sex, but sexual energy is creating life. It doesn't need to be a physical life. It can be a business idea, it can be a home, it can be relationships, it can be anything in your entire life. So if you're cultivating this energy into your life and your body, you're creating so much magnetism, and it's intimidating,
Hmm.
and that is why I believe it is controlled a lot in quite a few places, because if you have and embody your sexual energy, you can transform so many things in your health, in your well-being, and every area of your life. But we're typically told not to talk about it, let alone
Mm.
experience it. And it can be a very vulnerable place to be with someone, and a place that most of us are never taught in our lives, which is why people can see it as a really spiritual practice. And for me, one of my big things I want to create in the world is that I want it to become mainstream. I want it to be seen as something approachable that people can do on a daily basis, but without losing the sacredness of it. I don't know if sacredness is a word, without losing that element of how special and powerful it can be. Because the world needs this energy. And if it's banned or seen as a taboo for a reason, it's because it's probably very powerful.
Is it banned?
It's not banned, but when I say banned, sorry, I've been in places in the world where sex is illegal in some places, like
Yeah.
unless you're married, and things like the UAE
Right.
or Indonesia, where there are laws now coming into place. And that is no disrespect. There's a lot of religion, there's a lot of politics, which I, never want to, I don't have enough. Exactly right. I don't have enough experience in those religions to make those comments, but things are
Ah.
shifting, changing in certain areas of the world for sure.
Yeah, they certainly are, and it's, fascinating how, religion can get into our bedrooms. I think that only kind of furthers the taboo. I'll just throw that out there. How's that? Who knows if it's right or wrong? It's what I said. I
Ghost
don't
and
mean
post,
never mean to offend. Yeah, exactly right.
post and ghost.
So
Sorry,
I'm sorry?
I said sorry, but it was post and ghost. I said it the wrong way around.
Ghost, ghost, that's right. Uh, so when you teaching this in a business, is it a business setting? You're teaching tantra along with making business connection and coaching?
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what? I
Wow.
really don't want to use the c word, coaching. I don't know. I just feel it's so overused, but it's my thing. It's my thing. Yes,
What would you rather use? What's a synonym? Guiding?
guiding. I think empowering. I never want to be someone that
Empowering.
I never want to be someone that takes someone's own opinions or own intuition and gives them something else. I think you're in charge
Mm,
of your own body, your own mind, and a lot of people delegate this to other people and they look for help outside of themselves. And the tough thing is, honey, it's all within you. Like, and
mm,
I've learned that the hard way, of course. I've outsourced my
hmm,
intuition many a times. And so, what I do in my practices is that we sit down first and we go inwards and we look at ourselves and we're like, well, you know what? What actually motivates you? So, it's often sales organizations that I help. And it's interesting, right? Because a lot of these big corporates are like, okay, let's just try and see. And it's so transformative to see these people realize what motivates them as a human. And typically, it can be connection. Now, as a salesperson or a very driven entrepreneur or business leader, your connections are very important to you. And the connection to yourself is even more important when you make these decisions. So that's how I combine the tantra piece with the business element around how
hmm.
is your body and your mind feeling towards any situation you're in. And then obviously, let's communicate it, of course. So, connection communication is everything. I don't necessarily go to corporates and start off with the Tantra conversation. Imagine talking to like a big bank and being like, right, guys, I'm going to teach your whole salespeople Tantra. And they're going to be like, no. But, the longer lasting relationships I build, of course, we naturally start talking about it. Or clients that I've worked with in the past, they know me. So, it's one of the bonuses of being a successful salespeople. You meet great contacts along the way. So, yeah, you have to be aware of how you word these things, but
Mm.
it makes a huge difference to the world.
How did you arrive to this method, this way?
I went to classic. I went to Bali last year. I've always been. I mean, when I've had disordered eating, I've been out of my body the whole time. Right? I
Hmm.
was so disconnected, and a lot of people with disordered eating or body dysmorphia or some form of mental health related. I don't want to say issue, but some mental health illness is often dissociated from their body. So I was very shocked when I had worked so much on my mind that, oh my goodness, I'm over exercising all the time, or I'm burnt out because I'm not listening to my body. And I really made a conscious effort to go inwards and understand my body. And then I went to a Tantra retreat last year, and I was very taken aback by how away from mainstream it was, but yet how powerful it was for the day to day person. And that's when I started embodying that into my business world, because not everyone has the fortunate ability to go to Bali. Not everyone wants to go to Bali.
Mm.
And it's a superpower. It's magnetism. If there's a lit up salesperson or a embodied, connected business person, you can feel it in the room. You want to know that person. You want to know what
Hmm.
they're doing, and you want to know how they can help you. And so it's just so powerful.
I'm gonna only liken it because it's the only thing I could relate to is kind of yoga, where there's physical mixed with spiritual. Is that a similar discipline?
Yeah, I mean, what I create is a combination of breath work, which I know is becoming huge over in the US.
Hmm.
I combine what I've learned in Australia, because Australia is like the wellness capital, which now makes sense as to why I intuitively wanted to move over here. So, from someone that's from London, I've combined my business acumen with what I've learned in Australia. So, it's a combination of breath work, movement, meditation. And when I say meditation, we're not necessarily sitting in silence, it's through sound. So often through your chest, your yoni or your creative space, there is sound that you can channel in your stomach and the lower end of your body, and that brings up so much emotion and expression. And for someone that hasn't stepped up at work, asked for a pay rise for a long time, someone who's unhappy with their colleagues, this is so powerful, because they're awakening that again in their body, and they're realizing what it is. And sometimes afterwards, you will come out of it and be like, oh my gosh, now I know what I need to do. But you're building your confidence because you're having these conversations. And it's a self worth thing as well. Like, it's intimidating to sit in a room with your colleagues and start doing these practices. So that's the
Hmm.
first step, right? That's the first. Let's get out your comfort zone, honey. Let's do what you've got to do. The second step is obviously the vulnerable conversations that you probably are going to have to have. The third part is the rewards. If you get the promotion, you get the pay rise, you say to your boss, hey, I'm going to set up a business on the side. I'm going to work 1 hour less a week, but you're doing something for you. So, yeah, that's the reward. But not everyone wants to
Uh,
do it. Okay.
so by the way, you mentioned meditation. That's another stigma. People, you're just sitting in silence. Sometimes you have guided, sometimes you don't have guided, but you're just sitting in silence. People, there's really nothing to it. You know, I do it. I've been doing it for a little while, and my friends say, "Don't you think about other things?" I say, "Yeah, occasionally," but the idea is just be with yourself and get off the grid and just meditate, man. Come on, it's not that. It's amazing. Some of the most healthiest things in your life are just free, by the way, are just you need more sunlight, you need to walk, you need to drink more water. I mean, these things that are just uh, don't cost much, Lucy, but they're all there. When you have I was going to say students, but when you have your sales team there that you're working with, if you find that some aren't participating, do you have to kind of straighten them out? Like, what's your recourse there?
What I always do before is I have a one-on-one with, depending on the size of the team, but I'll get to know the managers to start off with, because if I know the managers and how the managers like to work, I can see the level of transparency that often happens in the teams. So, um you know I'm some of my managers have hated me before as an employer
Right.
because I question and and I'll understand, well, what level are we going to be dealing with from a vulnerability perspective. So that's normally the first place that I'll go to, and I'll look at the managers that are most nervous around or resistant around spending time, and that's okay. Of course that's okay. God, I 3 or 4 years ago would have been like, oh my god, what are we doing? Actually, no, I would have loved it, but I would have also questioned why we were doing it. I would have wanted to go back and get on the phone and sell some, make some money. So I will look at the managers and I will look at the ones that have been at the business for the longest, because typically after, say, 7 years, you are almost part of the company more than just an employee. You may have your family, your pension, everything is solely on this company. So you are very set in your ways, which is, of course, understandable. So I will look at the demographics that I'm working with. For anyone that's resistant, I'm like, great, this is a challenge. Let's work out what's going on here. So often I won't want someone to feel like they have to do anything they don't want to do. If you don't want to participate, totally cool. Let's have a chat. Let's go for coffee. Let's go for a walk. Let's go for lunch if you want to. If you don't want to, I'm not going to force you, but I know your colleagues, you're going to start seeing your colleagues making some differences and changes in their lives. And it's a domino effect, right? Whether it takes a year, 6 months for you to decide that this is a change you want to make on yourself, that's your responsibility. It's not my responsibility to force anyone to do anything they don't want to do. However, I know with sales teams typically, and in businesses, right? Um, People buy from people. So if they're seeing someone doing well that they
Mm.
do, and they're an A type person that's competitive, often in these tech companies we're all these go getters, then they're going to want to do the same thing, but it will just be done in their own way. So a lot of things there.
Lucy, you're an old soul, aren't you?
Ah, I think no one's really ever said that to me before. I go through phases. When I'm in my business zone, absolutely. I can read people very easily and I can
Yeah,
understand processes and situations. Um, Sometimes I just like a break and just have fun.
of course. Yeah, of course. I can see what happens in some of those scenarios where managers have been forced to kind of do this and they want to get their team back to wherever, like you said, sales, and they might not have the best attitude towards it. And, the shit rolls downhill, right? So they're forced to do something and then everybody's got to do it. And so you kind of put in this position, but I can see you turning them around and making it worth it.
One thing I love to do, firstly, thank you. One thing I love to do is sit in silence once I've asked someone a question, because there's that
Mm.
classic old sales tool where people will confide in you more if you give them enough time to continue to talk. And for a manager that's, say, been in their job for like 25 years and I rock up, you know, there is that thing of, who's this chick? What is she doing? Does she know anything? But if I give them the space to talk and open up, there's always going to be a way around these things. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I learned the hard way. I really got thrown out when you're, a salesperson. Early days, you get given the worst accounts. Like I remember, I rang
Right.
someone, the guy had died. Like I rang a woman. It was awful, but the customer died 5 years ago, and it was an old piece of information on a CRM tool. But these companies do that for a way for you to learn the
Oh,
hard way, yeah, to have compassion, empathy. And this poor woman would have had an innocent salesperson ring every year for these conversations. And I remember I put in the worst accounts and really kind of like an apprentice setup where dog eat dog, and you have to learn to read people and understand people and be in situations that you do not want to be in. And I think we live in a world now where there's a lot more empathy and a lot more compassion, and I hope that that doesn't happen to so many people now. But if you intimidate me, I kind of want to get to know you more, because I'm like, great,
mm.
what's going on here? So yeah, it's interesting.
And while it may have been tough at that point, it made you better for the next time it would happen. So you
Yeah.
learn from it. So on the podcast, Lucy, we talk. So I lost a lot of weight, right? When I started my business, I got heavy. I wasn't paying attention to myself. And the doctor said, if you don't lose weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. So that's all I wanted. That's all I needed to hear. And I turned it all around, lost 130 pounds. I think that's about 100 kilos. And people ask me, as soon as I say that, the first thing, and I could just see it in their face, how'd you do it? How'd you do it? And I just
Mhm.
say discipline, right? Discipline, people. There's no quick answer to this. I got focus, I got discipline, and I did it over a year and a half. How does discipline play a role in your life, Lucy Wood?
Wow. Well, I mean, firstly, I've seen that in your previous podcast, but that is amazing. Like, I think that's just something you should be incredibly proud of yourself for, because so many people don't ever look at their body and their weight, let alone take a step forward. So huge. Discipline, I've spoken about this very openly before. When you have had like disordered eating or something like that, discipline is your absolute superpower, because that you have strong discipline. And I was the opposite end of the scale. I was obsessed with weighing 4 stone. I don't know what that is in kgs, from the age of 8 to 14. And I kept that weight from, obviously that was just so underweight. And, becoming a woman and all these things during that time was just very delayed for me. And thank God I'm healthy. But the discipline I learned with that has taught me to be very resilient in my businesses, in my relationships. But it's also, I think discipline can be seen as quite a tough word, to be quite tough on yourself sometimes. And discipline, sometimes I have to actually take myself a step back and be like, hey, let's just have the afternoon off. Like, you're not in a good headspace right now. You are tired. Like, let's just take some time off. And that's also discipline. Hey, let's just go to a friend's birthday party and let go for the day. Like, the discipline comes in so many ways. But I think the core thing for me about discipline is getting up at 5 a.m. to do this interview. It's not 5 a.m. right now, but to do an interview the best for the person that's interviewing me and for myself and the businesses involved. Yes, okay, let's do it. Is this best for my health? Yes, okay, let's do it. Asking those simple questions, because discipline can be seen as like, you got to keep going, you're strong. But sometimes if you're not, that's okay. That's also discipline. Yeah.
It's a spectrum. I'm learning. It's I asked different. Everybody gives me a different answer. It's absolutely. You call it a superpower. It's absolutely amazing. You know, uh, do you think discipline plays a role in tantra?
Yes.
How so?
Ooh, discipline to be vulnerable, because that's
Hmm.
really scary. Discipline to be open. We are very quick. We can be very quick to close off our hearts. Take a step back. Oh my god, too much. Can't do this. Ego gets involved, and I just want to say there's nothing wrong with ego. The ego is there to keep us safe. We should all love our own egos. But the discipline to keep putting in the time and the intention to be connected with your body and the other person that it's involved, that takes discipline, because it's not easy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not. And I get pushback sometimes, Lucy. Like you mentioned before, empathy and compassion. Sometimes I hear we don't need discipline; we need empathy and compassion. And to that, I say, by the way, there's no wrong answer.
Mm.
We don't need. I'm not looking. I don't mean to be Captain Discipline here. There's some things that I'm disciplined at, and there's lots of stuff that I am not. And I believe you need to be compassionate and empathetic, but perhaps you need just a little bit of self-discipline to be both of those?
100%. Like, oh gosh. I mean, the last 2 years when I was in Australia during the lockdown, I wasn't disciplined at all. Like, and I
Mm,
think you can't blame circumstances for very shocking and challenging for most people. I don't want to blame it on that, but I was not disciplined at all. And I learned the hard way sometimes, right? Like, I learned I'm where I am right now and I'm hard on myself. I'm not where I want to be at 32, and that's okay. I am where I'm supposed to be, but I hadn't taken enough discipline. And now I've gone from the other end of being like, cool, we're 32, we've dealt with the disordered eating, it's a work in progress forever. But we take discipline in the areas that we want to do, and we have the
mm.
communications, we take the responsibility. And we take charge of our lives, because I've definitely not had discipline. I went from one extreme of having so much discipline for 22 years to then almost being on holiday for 2 years,
Mm.
realizing, well, we need to take responsibility and have some discipline. So yeah, I agree with you. I hate the word balance, because balance is different for everyone, but
Oh.
you got to mix it up.
Your thumbnail for your podcast has a you're very photogenic, you're a very pretty woman, but you have yourself, with your finger over your mouth like, "Shh." Why is that?
Because it's like almost like the secrets. It's like it's the things you wanna talk about you're too afraid to say, and I know it's corny, I know a lot of
Mm.
people use that phrase, but
Mm.
what always surprises me with my podcast is the amount of messages I get afterwards, people sharing about their relationships, their, marriages, the things that they've left, and it's always a higher percentage of men than it is women, and I'm
Huh.
like, it's so fascinating, because my show was originally created for women, and I'm now like, it's not created for any gender. I believe everyone, if you wanna listen to it, if not, whatever, cool. But it's like people don't want to talk about it, but they really want to talk about it. So it's kind of teasing them, being like, I get it, haha, you don't want to talk about it, but you are. You're messaging me. I get some crazy stories where I'm like, wow, I'm so proud of them for taking the action and, being inspired from the show and feedback around what they want to listen to. But there's so much shame still. So it's
Mm.
like, hey, these are taboo topics. So let's pretend that you don't want to talk about them, but you actually do. So I'm sure I'll change my cover at some point, but it was kind of like an underlying meaning. I mean, working under pleasure, which is the title of my show, is also an underlying meaning of we feel pressured to do all these things. And actually, if we're enjoying what we're doing, things are far more easier in life, but you're still working. So you can still combine those things together, whether that's your growth, finances, relationships, whatever. It's all work. So yeah.
That's exactly what I took from it when I saw it. So I like it. I think that's exactly what when I was a younger man and I would go to the doctor or the dentist, and we'd be in the waiting room. There's all the magazines, and I would never read the men's magazines. I'm a man. I already know what men think. I would always go to the women's magazines. So because I want to know what they're thinking. I want to understand how they work. So when you say men are watching you, I think it's a little bit of that.
I do too. It's a lot of men that are potentially
Curious.
unsure. They're curious there, but they're unsure of how, yeah, exactly, to start the conversations with their
Mm.
partners, or they've been in marriages for years and they've realized maybe this isn't going well. What can we do to change? And how can I encourage my woman from another woman's perspective to start these conversations? So there's no underlying meaning or element around them. It's like, hey, it's almost kind of like a counselor or a therapist kind of vibe. And a lot of women just don't want to talk about it, which I want to make a real change to, because I think it's our responsibility to communicate too. So yeah, that's a really good insight to hear, though, actually, that you used to look at women's magazines versus men, because I wonder why women just don't feel they can talk about it, and share it. So yeah,
Yeah,
get
most
on.
of my friends were male, and I know what they think, and I know what I think. But I wanted more female friends. I had a sister, and was raised by my mother, and I still wanted to hear those perspectives,
Mm.
um, and perhaps not the best way, but it was one outlet. We didn't have podcasts back then, but Lucy Wood, what motivates you?
People, like connections, being just looking around and being really proud of the people that I'm surrounded by,
Mm.
and seeing people follow what they actually really want to do in their lives. That really motivates me, because people are termed as rebels that go against the grain and do what they want to do, but I think that should be the norm. So anyone
Mm.
that's just doing what they want to do, I really love that. That motivates me so much, you know. Yeah.
The joy that I receive when my friends are doing well is just one of the best things ever. And when you have those acquaintances that perhaps you had in London, that they're just kind of going in a different direction, and you need to remove them, and there's going to be some feelings hurt, and you don't mean to, and perhaps eventually you'll come back together. But where you're going in your particular journey is not the same as theirs. And well, we're grown-ups, we'll figure it out eventually. But it's a wonderful sentiment. How do you measure success?
In how I feel. Yeah. Um, the driven businesswoman in me naturally will be like my finances. But I've learned on different, entrepreneurial journeys that it isn't the case. How I feel is my main thing. Am I feeling supported by my own actions in myself, and am I feeling supported by the people around me, and also are the people around me doing well? Are we building each other up? I think literally I love what you've just said around when you see your friends being successful.
Mm.
When you see that happen, you're like, great, that's an indication that's going to happen in my life, but also I'm so happy that they're doing that for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I have great friends who have done very well, and I may have played a very small role in it, and they never let me forget, and they invite me to places, and we grow as adults, and their children play with each other. I mean, it's just prosperous for everyone. Lucy Wood, what an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. When we first you first agreed to be on, I was so excited, and learning about you and learning your journey and how you've turned it around, and you're helping others now, and you don't just keep it to yourself. You're broadcasting it to everyone. You're putting it on a podcast. You're announcing it. Hey, people, this is what I went through. This is what I'm doing to turn it around now. Perhaps it can be an example for you. It's the sign of a remarkable person. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And likewise, what you're doing is amazing. And your just like consistency and resiliency is so inspiring. So I'm very honored to be on the show today. And thank you for having me.
I am working hard on accepting compliments. Thank you. So, how can we get in touch with you?
Um, Check out my Working Under Pleasure podcast is the best way to go. So there's only 2 episodes in there at the moment, but there's some very good, exciting guests coming up. Go on Spotify, Apple. I've got a YouTube channel, which as you've learned and shared today, there's a lot of insights on there. So that's where I'm at the moment. Yeah, that's the best way to reach out to me and see what's happening. So there's a lot of exciting things ahead this year for sure.
Yeah, the episode with Susan was great, and then the other episode with your friend who you bunked with was wonderful as well.
Funny. Yeah, Yemi Penn, the TEDx speaker. That's an amazing one. Yeah, she was incredible, an amazing friend and amazing human to look up to for sure. And her documentaries are incredible. So yeah,
And your website, Lucy, Lucy dash wood, WOOD.com. We'll
yeah,
make sure to put them all in the links. Lucy, thank you so much for your time today.
my absolute pleasure. And thank you for having me. It was wonderful to meet you.
You as well. And if I'm ever in Sydney, we'll go get a drink.
100% for sure.
You be well.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversation.